I've been really grateful over the last year to be invited into the green sector by all the people I interviewed, by working with Green 2.0, and then even doing surveys. I got so many positive people reaching back to me who were interested in addressing this issue. And I have to say, in large part, many people mentioned the work of Green 2.0. So why do you care more about diversity and inclusion today than you did 5 years ago? Well, probably the biggest answer was Trump, right? Like, we have an environmental problem right now. A lot of our work's been undone, and we need to address it. The second reason was Green 2.0, because we didn't know, this is organization speaking, that we had a diversity problem until someone showed us the numbers, and we were like, oh, wow, that's a problem. And that's what I'm hoping to do today, is just share some of the other findings from this research to point out that there are problems, but they are addressable. And we can do that, hopefully, together. Some of the myths that I heard were super interesting to me. The biggest one being that there's a lack of diversity in the green sector because of a pipeline problem. Some organizational members and leaders said, well, a lot of our staff have PhDs in science, and so it can be harder to find people of color with PhDs. And I'm like, I work at a university. We have everyone who works here has a PhD, and we have more people of color than you do. So I'm just saying, they're out there. The second pipeline issue is that maybe people of color don't have an interest in the environment. And I heard the words inner city more often than I should have, to the point where it became offensive to me. That if you grew up in an inner city, which I did, you don't care about the environment. And I think, first of all, that's absurd. It's not like everyone likes to go out into the environment equally. But there may be even other environmental issues that maybe white people don't know about. Like, we want clean air, clean water. In Colorado, there's a town where you could light the water on fire. That's a problem, right? And so to say that people of color don't care about the environmental movement is just a myth. And the third myth is that we're just not bringing enough people of color into the organization. So we're not hiring enough. It's a pipeline problem. We'll just take more interns. That's not the problem. Because when we look at the data, people of color are entering the green movement, but they're leaving. And so that's why I said this is not a pipeline problem. It's really a leaky pipeline problem, because we're bringing people in, and HR departments and organizational leaders are investing valuable resources in trying to attract people of color, but not as much trying to retain them. And so they're leaving. And I'll tell you a little bit about my findings for why that is. So just to frame this, we're talking about diversity in terms of diversity and inclusion and equity and justice. So we all know what diversity means. This is a numbers game. How many people of color do we have? How many women do we have? Inclusion is more of what we've heard, the really profound statements from our speakers of being brought to the table, invited in, accepted. And not just in spite of your differences, but because of those differences. And that's really feeling included. Then there's also equity, which means that you're removing organizational barriers so that people have an equal chance of obtaining development opportunities, promotion opportunities, et cetera. And then justice, which is a greater vision of society that creates a better world for everyone. And I'm going to come back to these later. So what's the state of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in the environmental sector? Well, this is just diversity, but among the 20 or the 40 largest NGOs, 20% of the staff and 21% of the senior staff are people of color. And this is actually a huge increase from Green 2.0's data back in 2017, where it was 14%. In foundations, it's 25% of staff and 4% of senior staff. Maybe this doesn't seem that bad, but this is compared to other sectors like the tech sector, which we often use as an example of a non-diverse sector. It's kind of bad because We know that the greatest benefits of diversity are actually achieved when people comprise more than 25% of an organization. Cantor's work on tokenism said when you have less than 25%, it actually makes your differences more stereotyped. And when you're over 25%, you actually become one of the crowd rather than the person in the corner. But we know that turnover rates are higher among people of color. This creates the leaky pipeline problem. 34% higher. And why is that? I think that's some of the issues we're going to talk about today. So what can you do? These are some data from other studies in other industries, but I think they would apply to the green sector. A very simple strategy is if you just increased the number of people of color in your organization, it would increase the retention of the people of color you have. And so that's really self-reinforcing, right? Because now you're adding more diverse staff and you're keeping the talent that you already have. So that's an easy one. Having greater support for diversity and inclusion in organizations increases retention. That's great. And then among the most important things, at least in my research that has come out, is top-level leadership support for diversity and inclusion predicts people's intent to stay. Okay, so let me tell you about the study I did. So I decided in trying to understand what was going on in the green movement, I couldn't start with a survey because I didn't know what to ask on the survey. So I started with interviews of top leaders within the environmental sector to ask them, people of color and white people at the very top of organizations, 22 people of color at the C level or VP level, 15 white, and then down at the director level, 26 people of color and 3 white, to ask them, what are you doing that works? Or what are you doing that doesn't work? And they gave me some insights. And from those insights, I created this survey where we surveyed 21 CEOs from those 40 largest NGOs, 14 of their HR directors, and 421 employees. So for each CEO, we have about 20 employees, so we can look at how the CEO's practices might affect employees of color and white employees. Here are some themes that emerged from the interviews that I found so interesting. So I asked people a lot about the business case for diversity, because I'm a business professor, right? And we know there's a clear business case for diversity, but it might be a little different in the green sector because it's not, we want to reach our diverse customer base in the same way. But people did point to really similar benefits of having diverse talent. The first is in decision making. And this is just one woman said, the diversity of experiences, the diversity of backgrounds, the diversity of ages is extremely important when we make decisions. And we all know this is true. There is a classic study by Solomon Asch where they put 3 people in a room and they asked them to differentiate which line was the same as line X. And there's 3 lines. And there's clearly a right answer and there's 2 wrong answers. You've probably seen this in psychology class many years ago. And the first person was actually a Confederate, and so they say the wrong answer. The second person is also a Confederate, and they say the wrong answer. And now the real participant is starting to wonder, right, what's going on? The third person speaks up, and they give the same wrong answer. And so what happens, according to the classic study, more than 50% of the time, people knowingly give the wrong answer because they want to fit in with what everyone else is saying. So in 2018, someone redid this study, but they made the room more diverse. So people still gave the wrong answers. And when the room was diverse, people were significantly less likely to give the wrong answer than when the room was all white. This is just some of the benefits that diversity brings in terms of decision making. There was a theme that came out around diversity of membership, that some organizations are, their membership is primarily white and maybe older, and that they need to build new members. And so this biracial female said, we need diverse voices to build the case for the work we're doing. We need to convince everyone else that what we're doing is really important. In addition, people talked about the importance of diversity for fundraising efforts, which I found quite interesting. One person said that one of the ways diversity has helped us is in our fundraising efforts. We are able to translate and tell our story to a broader demographic base than I've seen in the past. And if you can tie something to money, you think that would be enough, right? Like that's the case. We're done. Like it's going to increase fundraising. That should be Think of all the things that your organizations do to increase fundraising. Partnerships. By broadening our programs and by including environmental justice into those programs, we can build partnerships regionally and statewide with communities that aren't traditionally served by the conservation community. So what was the problem? And these are, again, in the interviews, some themes that emerged. There were others, but these really hit me. One was just the feeling of being valued. And I heard words like people looking right through me and not seeing me. This Asian female said, anytime a person of color gets a job or a promotion or seen as successful, it's seen as disingenuous. Their skills, abilities, and commitment are questioned. They are taking the promotion from someone else.